Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Kate, I make videos about books and bookish things, and it is time for a summer reading wrap-up. I've been gone for a little bit. I had quite a busy summer between moving back up to university for 2 weeks just to get the lay of the land, check out my new house for this year, and then having my significant other visit for 2 weeks. We're in a long-distance relationship. It's always quite a big deal when we actually get to see each other. I haven't actually had as much time for reading as I had intended to, but I still got a fair amount done, and so I thought before I head back to university for the official start of term, I would run you through 6 of the books that I read over this summer. There are 3 that I am leaving out for a different video. I'll just mention those books so that you know they're going to be talked about in the foreseeable future. Those are Book Lovers by Emily Henry, We Play Ourselves by Jen Silverman, and Matrix by Lauren Groff. Those are for a separate video. I have read them. I will be talking about them in said video. Without further ado, let's just start at the very beginning. So the first book that I am going to be talking about is The Manningtree Witches by A.K. Blakemore. I don't have my physical copy with me because I promised one of my university friends that she could borrow it from me, so it's still up in my university home and I cannot show it to you because, Anna, you're getting to read it. The Manningtree Witches by A.K. Blakemore is a fictional story of the women of a village named Manningtree near Essex, which was the first place visited by Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, in the late Tudor, early Stuartish era, and it is about the lives of these women when he comes to visit and how it affects their community. It mostly follows a single girl whose name is Rachel, I believe. I may have remembered that wrong, but it mostly follows her because her mother is one of the first people accused of witchcraft by Matthew Hopkins, and she is therefore held under suspicion as well due to being her daughter. This was a really interesting book. It was given to me by my granny for Christmas. It wasn't one that I requested or chose myself, so I was very interested to see how it appealed to me. Broadly, I thought it was really well written. There was a really interesting writing style that came, I think, from A.K. Blakemore's attempt to sort of replicate a more archaic method of speech while still being inherently readable. So there was a really interesting use of natural metaphor throughout it because, of course, that is what peasants would have been able to access. But it was really interesting to read in that way because it still had that sort of old-fashioned feel to it. The story itself was also it felt very medieval. It was very slow-paced. It took place over a number of years, and you really just got a sense of like the drudgery of living in the village of Manningtree and why it is such a big deal when someone new moves in, specifically Matthew Hopkins, who is not quite a celebrity at that point, but he is known enough that people go, "Ooh, it's a big deal that he's paying attention to us." I don't know exactly how much I liked it. It's one of those books where I can appreciate what it does and I can say that it is objectively a good book. However, did I like it? Did I enjoy the experience of reading it? Hard to say. I was glad to read it, I was glad to have read it, but it wasn't one I was going, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Not least because it is inherently very dark. There is a lot of discussion of torture and mistreatment and just the terrible things that were done to the women accused of being witches. So, not least because Matthew Hopkins has some real weird, like, I don't want to say Freudian, but he's got some complexes about sex and what he is allowed to desire as a Puritan man, and it very much fuels some of the ways that he treats these women, which was not the comfiest to read about. But I appreciated it. I didn't think it was bad at all, just not something that is particularly enjoyable to read. You know, I don't enjoy reading about women being mistreated very frequently. I gave it like a 3.5 stars out of 5 because it was good. I had nothing against it. Yeah, that's all I've got to say, really. Unfortunately, the next book that I'm going to be talking about, I don't have such complimentary things to say about. I don't have my physical copy for this one again. That is because I immediately got rid of it. I next read The Dark Lady by Akala and I was so disappointed by it. This is the story of a young boy named Henry who is a pickpocket in London in Tudor England and who has some kind of magical, mystical ability that means he can read anything you put in front of him, regardless of language. If it is even written in language, he can read it. He also has weird dreams about this dark lady. I didn't really know what the plot of this one was, to be honest. I started reading it and I got about 50 pages in and then realised I wasn't really gelling with it, and so skim read the rest of it because I did want to find out what happened. I wanted to see if it could still pique my interest, and reader it did not, so I basically just skim read the whole thing. Definitely not the way that you are encouraged to interact with a book, and I definitely got a reduced experience of it because of that, but I still don't think it would have been that impressive if I had given it my full attention. It was not written well. The characterisation was really, really thin. The way it was written read like someone had done a research project on Elizabethan, Tudor, Shakespearean England and had learned as many of the words and slang phrases as possible and was then trying to jam them into this novel. It just read like someone had done a research project and gone, cool, time to just put all of this into a fictional account, which meant it felt really, really disjointed. There was a really, really weird balance between creative license, you know, writing something really imaginative and fantastical because you wanted to, and then sticking to the hard facts of the era that meant it was really, really hard to get a logical sense of the narrative world. The writing switched very drastically between this, we are using only Elizabethan slang and Elizabethan terms, to very, very casual modern English, and it just really didn't work for me. I was so disappointed. I wanted this to be good and I had such high hopes for it. As I'm sure you could tell in the video where I did my little book haul and I talked about it, I had such high hopes for especially the way that language was going to be used in this because it was written by a rapper, and yet I felt so thoroughly let down by it. I can't remember a huge amount about it because at this point I read it nearly 2 months ago, and to be honest, I'm kind of glad. I think me remembering less about it will mean I have less ability to be cruel about it, so I awarded this 1 star. I would not recommend it. Yeah, I just wish it was better. Now we move on to the books that I do have my physical copies for. The next book that I read after The Dark Lady was When You Were Everything by Ashley Woodfolk. This was a book I was thoroughly looking forward to reading, and it did not disappoint. This is the story of a girl named Cleo whose friendship with her best friend Layla has imploded, and it follows 2 timelines, both the lead up to this big like friend breakup and the aftermath of it, as Cleo tries to reconcile between remembering the good parts of this friendship and preserving the person that she loved for so long, and moving past it and accepting that her friend wasn't who she wanted her to be. I will say this was a really well-loved cast of characters. There are so many characters in this that I felt were so real and they were so easy to attach yourself to because they felt so human that it was very easy to get sucked into the narrative and into the story simply because all these characters felt really lived in, and I really enjoyed that about it. This is a book about platonic love and the way that platonic love can go sour, and I really appreciate stories that give platonic relationships and friendship the prescience that they do have, especially in teenage lives. It's a sorely underwritten about topic, I feel, and so I was really glad that this book treated friendship with such an importance, because it is. This is an excellent book for representation as well. This is a predominantly POC cast of characters. Both Cleo and Layla are women of colour. There are maybe 1 or 2 named white characters in this, and it was just fantastic to read about it, especially as it is set in New York and you get such a real sense of the vibrancy of Cleo's neighbourhood and the people that she lives near and lives around, and I just thoroughly appreciated that about it. There was also a romance subplot that I didn't hate. Do I think it lended much to this book? No, it could have been just as strong without it. However, Cleo and Dom's budding relationship was really sweet and I didn't mind it at all. This was just a really solid book. I think I gave it 3.5 stars because although it didn't do anything spectacular, it did a lot of things that I really wanted it to do really well, and it was a very warm story. I did feel that there would have been an opportunity to go more into the idea of what it meant for Layla to betray Cleo in the way that she did, but yeah, This was a really, really good book. It did everything I wanted it to, and I was very, very glad to have read it. So When You Were Everything by Ashley Woodfolk would highly recommend, and I will definitely be looking at Ashley Woodfolk's other books because she has shown herself to be an excellent writer. So yeah, that's a good one. Unfortunately, I have to be mean about another book. The next book that I read was Wild Girls by Rory Power, and I really didn't like this. And it wasn't just because it was horror. I had a feeling this maybe wouldn't gel with me because I'm not typically a horror person. I don't like reading things that will scare me, will upset me, but I was willing to make an exception because this sounded really, really good. And so I was looking forward to diving out of my comfort zone and seeing some good storytelling, except I didn't find that. This is the story of Hetty, Byatt and Reese, who are three girls who have been trapped quarantined on an island school after the tox. A pandemic slips its way among the students and the government decides that the best way to deal with it is just to clamp down and leave them all there. It has been 2 years since this happened and the girls have just been on survival mode ever since. However, when Hetty's best friend Byatt goes missing, she decides to go explore and finds out more about the reality of what is going on with this illness and the ways that it affects the girls around her. This was disappointing on a lot of levels, and I am going to run through just some of them. Firstly, this book really prides itself on being a sapphic horror novel. It really, really sells itself on the fact that this is sapphic, that this is about women in relationships with women. The relationship between Hetty and Reese is one that is hinted at initially quite a lot, that Hetty has a crush on Reese, that she feels about Reese in a way that she doesn't about anyone else. And Reese is not a nice character. Reese is a really, really horrible, bitchy, bitter, petty, aggressive girl. And that's fine. I support women's rights and women's wrongs. However, I think if you were to put Reese into a male character's body and have the way Reese treats Hetty be exactly the same, this would be treated as a massive problem. Very simply, if Reese were a male character, she would be viewed as abusive, toxic and awful, and she is all of those things. However, I feel these are overlooked simply because it is a lesbian relationship. Hetty's feelings for Reese do not excuse the way Reese treats her, including things like physically attempting to strangle her on the floor of a school because Hetty was given a position of privilege above Reese. Also, it's not even a relationship. I'm sorry to disappoint anyone who is looking for a nice lesbian story in amongst a horror setting, but there is no relationship. They kiss once, and that is it. There is no further discussion of feelings. There is no even acknowledgement of the hurt that Reese has caused Hetty. They simply kiss once, and it is left at that. I do not count that as a romance subplot. I felt that Reese's character was one that would have been subject to a lot more scrutiny were she not a sapphic woman. Additionally, the horror aspect of this. I was expecting to be scared. I was expecting to have nightmares, to feel anxious walking around my house in the dark. There was no horror, there was just icky, disgusting medical things that made me feel nauseous. I do not count that as horror. It did not make me feel horrified, it just made me feel a bit sick, frankly. The way I described this again to my significant other was, it is the horror equivalent of a romance novel that is like a series of sex scenes sewn together by vague plot. This was essentially just a machine to move you from one disgusting image to the next, and it really did it no favours. The plot in this, threadbare. I really, really struggled to see the thriller aspect of it. It was just simply that it was following the most logical plot progression to the point where there is no point attempting to make it a mystery or a thriller, because you can go, this would be an expected character development, this would be an expected plot beat. That's basically it. My main issue with it is the ending on two fronts. Firstly, the end of this book reads like about 5 pages just got chopped off the end of the manuscript and it was printed like that. It ends, to put it generously, in media res, by which I mean it's unbelievable that you would simply just stop there. It just feels completely unnatural and it makes no sense to conclude the book there. And secondly, this book, so if you remember from my video, my haul video, I said that I was tempted by the quote on the back that said it is a visceral and addictive thriller about survival and the power of female friendships. Female friendships in this are weak as anything, and the final act of the book, the final thing that Hetty decides to do, hinges very, very heavily on her choosing to say, fuck everyone else. It's all about me and Reese, which it just went so solidly against what I thought the main ethos of this book was that I was deeply, deeply disappointed. It was not, it just wasn't good, and I was so disappointed. I wanted this to be good, but the whole time I was reading it, and by the time I got to the end, I was just sat there thinking, there are like 10 different ways I would have done this, and I think it would have made it a significantly better book afterwards. It is the kind of book where I read it and ended up out of spite at the end thinking about how I would rewrite it to make it a better overall story, which is not a good sign. Yeah, I was deeply disappointed in this, and then I found out that the author is apparently racist. I will leave the source for where I found this below, but essentially, at the very, very least, she did something incredibly selfish and cruel to fellow authors, and that is putting it generously. That is if we overlook the fact that the things she did specifically harmed authors of colour. I will put where I read this below, because I would hate to say something like that completely unfounded and for other people to go, where's your evidence? You know, even if I'm being generous to her, she sounds like a not particularly nice person, and so I would not want to read any of her other books, at the very least just so that I'm not supporting her by buying her work. Yeah, I awarded this 3 stars to begin with, I then bumped it down to 2 on further reflection, and now I'm like, 2 might be pushing it a bit, but yeah, I was really disappointed in this. I'm really sorry, I wanted it to be good, I wanted to like this, but yeah. I will say this video now follows a very, very strong, like, narrative theme, because the next book I read was exceptional. I then read Deep Light by Frances Hardinge, and it was just perfect, is the best way I can describe it. This book did absolutely everything that I wanted it to do, with such finesse, such beautiful writing, such imagination, that I honestly do not think it could be anything less than a 5 star. This is the story of Hark, a little criminal boy on an island called Ladies' Crave in the archipelago of the Myriad. This is a series of islands that has been tormented by old sea gods for years and years and years, until 30 years prior they all killed each other and vanished. This is a land that is still so steeped in superstition and the mythical stories of these gods that it still affects their lives even now. The story begins when Hark, on the terrible advice of his incredibly dubious friend Jelt, is caught doing some unsavoury criminal things and is sentenced to be auctioned off as a servant. He is picked up by the mad scientist archetype that Frances Hardinge writes so well, Dr. Vine, who needs someone who can lie. Dr. Vine runs a museum of the old gods on the next island along called Nest, and in particular she works with the Sanctuary, a place that houses the priests that worship the old gods who, now in their old age, need a lot of upkeep. Dr. Vine wants to know as much as she can about the old gods, and so tasks Hark with listening to them, or rather, with prying their secrets out of them, and Hark learns more than he bargained for. This is not even the end of the narrative, but I would hate to spoil more of it for you. Basically, people end up fucking around with gods, with what it means to be human, with what it means to create, with what it means to be safe, and it was just utterly fantastical. Every new concept that Frances Hardinge introduced in this story was just glittering with possibility and intrigue, and it was just so thoroughly magical. I really, really enjoyed it. The character of Hark is such a really, really wholesome character in that he is so flawed, he makes so many mistakes, but his biggest mistake is that he is loyal to a fault, which, reading about that, and especially the turn that his friendship with Jelt takes, was absolutely gut-wrenching. Like, the climax of this story is Hark having to come to the conclusion that he cannot save Jelt from himself, and so he has to accept that Jelt will have horrible things happen to him, and it hurt my feelings so much, but in the best way. all the concepts with the old gods, with Quest, who is one of the priests that Hark ends up actually befriending through this, with Selfin, the daughter of Riggs, one of the criminal gang members that Hark and Jelt work for. Selfin is a fantastic character, and in particular, Selfin is deaf. There is a concept of the sea-kissed in this book, which are people who, after being in the undersea, the great ocean beneath the ocean where the old gods lived, people get damaged from being down there for too long, and Selfin is one of them, and she is deaf as a result of it. The way that deafness and sign language are included in the cultures of the Myriad Islands was just magnificent, and I really, really appreciated it. Not least because in the acknowledgements at the back of the book, Frances says that the reason she did was because a deaf reader of hers said, "Would you consider putting a deaf person in your next book?" And she considered it, and she created something so beautiful and magical out of a real world factor of human life that I just have so much love for her as a writer. She is truly fantastic. I cannot recommend this book enough. I'm getting shivers just thinking about it again, so please read it. If you want some fantastical, slightly horror-ish, nautical themes, some really, really, like, incredible world building with some really fucked up stuff that happens as well. Like, I haven't even touched on the biggest plot point with Jelt, because it is just too fantastic for me to even risk spoiling it for you, but yeah, it was just amazing. Highly, highly recommend. Please read this. I'm lending this to one of my university friends as soon as I go back, because I just desperately need more people to know about this. Yeah. Read Deep Light. And the final book that I'm going to be talking about is Lycanthropy and Other Chronic Illnesses by Kristen O'Neill. This, again, was fantastic. This is the story of Priya, who is a first-year university student who has just been diagnosed with Lyme disease, and she is coming to terms with the fact that her body will no longer do what she wants it to do. She has an online friend named Bridget who she talks about a variety of things with, but then through one of their Tumblr mutuals, they end up in a chronic illness Discord server together, talking about the fact that they all have slightly broken bodies. And Priya and Bridget get even closer as a result of this. Bridget doesn't say what is wrong with her exactly, but she talks about the fact that once a month her body undergoes some really, really severe changes that leave her absolutely drained, exhausted, and just feeling not very human. So the start of this book is just a whole load of really, really accurate teen conversations that take place online. I was reading these like chat logs that are included in the book and just wheezing with laughter because it has the exact brand of like Gen Z humour that I and all of my online university like sixth form friends use, and it was so fantastic to see that included in a book that didn't feel cringy or like it was making fun of it, but just that it completely embraced this is how we interact with each other. There were so many meme references that I recognised immediately, but that I knew if I showed them to my parents they'd be like, what the fuck is nun pizza with left beef? I just enjoyed it so thoroughly. It was fantastic. And then of course there is the werewolf aspect of this book. Priya eventually goes to see Bridget after she posts a cryptic, upsetting Tumblr post about I can't do this anymore, this is just too much. And after realising that Priya and Bridget only live an hour away from each other, Priya drives to go see her and discovers that Bridget is a werewolf. Not before calling animal control though, which I have to say was just one of my favourite beats in this book. Priya not knowing what to do in a situation, so calling up animal control, and this scrawny little guy who is like her age turning up and going, well, what do you want me to do about it? Someone who is completely unequipped to deal with a werewolf turning up and going, you again? Why are you calling me again? The friendship between Priya, Bridget and Spencer, the animal control guy, was just delightful. More so as well, one of the biggest themes in the latter part of this book, once Priya has learned and accepted that Bridget is a werewolf, is that Bridget wants to get better. She wants to do something about her condition, but she isn't going about it in safe or caring ways. And so a lot of it is Priya trying to be a good friend by supporting Bridget in her decisions, but also be a good friend by saying, hey, this is dangerous, you shouldn't be doing this and I won't let you because I care about you, which, similar to When You Were Everything, I felt was such a realistic depiction of friendship and the ways that it can hurt so much to care about someone that sincerely. I really, really liked as well that this book focused almost solely on the platonic relationship between Priya and Bridget. This could have been a sapphic book, this could have been a story about the two of them falling for each other, but it wasn't. As it was, their relationship was just as intense and intimate and loving as a relationship could have been, but they chose to leave it platonic, and I think that did it so many favours, because instead of focusing on the difficulties of falling in love with someone like that, it was about enduring your friends being terrible to themselves. And I thought that was a much, much more valuable and beautiful story to be telling. Another of the really, really beautiful moments in this is one where in the Oof Ouch My Bones Discord server, they have once weekly meetups where they talk about how things have been going with their conditions, and one of them makes one of the classic Gen Z jokes about lol, wish I wasn't alive, and they're all like, haha, we're all just joking though, until one of them pipes up and goes, actually, I don't think I am joking when I say that anymore, and admits to having been feeling suicidal as a result of their chronic illness. And the whole group just immediately, jokes stop, they are all just there supporting this person who lives thousands of miles away from some of them, but they're there going, look, you will be okay, we will all get through this. If you start planning anything severe, take yourself straight to the hospital. But we are here for you and we love you no matter who you are or what you are or how you feel. And I really, really appreciated that, not least because it is a very accurate part, I feel, of having these very intense, very distanced online friendships. I know I had experienced that when I was younger, making friends online, so I really appreciated that inclusion of it within the story, even if it is obviously a difficult subject. So I would say to go carefully, especially in those chapters, if that is something that you would find difficult to read about. But on the whole, all it did was supplement this story that is all about the enduring love of friendship and the power that is caring for other people. Priya doesn't recover from her Lyme disease, it's something that she will live with. Bridget doesn't recover from being a werewolf. None of the people with their chronic illnesses in this story are suddenly magically transformed, but they are given something good. They are given friendships and solidarity and community, and it is really, really beautiful to see these friendships and relationships, in the case of two of the people in the server, develop and grow and just bond over the fact that they're not okay, but they're okay. And I thought this was just a really, really fun, light-hearted, but still really sincere and beautiful story, so I can only recommend it. I will note, I saw some things on Storygraph that I did just want to bring up. I had considered making a full video about this, but then after talking with one of my friends realised it wouldn't be my place to talk about this kind of thing, and I would be at the risk of turning myself into a bit of a double standard. But I saw a lot of surprisingly low reviews for this on Storygraph that were specifically because this is a story written by a white author that features a South Indian protagonist. Specifically, these reviews were saying it is not a white author's place to write a person of colour as the main character, that it shouldn't be done and that own voices literature is far more important, telling people to listen to South Indian voices before choosing to support this author. I had to scroll through a really significant number of these reviews by white people to get to the reviews by people saying, I am South Indian, and all of them said, I didn't mind it at all. I thought this was good representation. I am happy with this book being what it is. I just wanted to bring that up. It is not a bad thing for authors to write about things they have not personally experienced. At what point do we stop taking fiction as fictional? This is a story about a werewolf. At no point does it become about Priya's identity as South Indian, which I do think would have been overstepping for a white author to write about. But to discredit this book and all the wonderful things it does for friendship, for people with chronic illness, for just talking about online friendships and validating them in a way that very few other pieces of media do, is to do it a massive disservice, because the people whose voices matter when talking about this don't find it offensive or inappropriate for Kristen O'Neill to have written this. And it is a separate problem that I had to scroll so far to find those reviews by the people whose voices matter because of white people virtue signalling. I will not say any more. I think I've probably already said more than is my fair share to say as a white person, but I did just want to bring it up because this is fiction, and it's really good fiction, and it is doing it a massive disservice to say that white people shouldn't be allowed to write characters who aren't exactly like them. But that is all I will say about that. Not least because overall I just thought it was a really, really good book and I would love more people to read it. Again, I'm taking it to university with me so that one of my friends can read it. That is everything I read this summer. Well, excluding those 3 books that I'll talk about in a separate video, but yeah, that is basically everything I read this summer. And I have to say it was a mixed bunch. There were a couple of things I was thoroughly disappointed by, but a couple of things that I thought were genuinely superlative. So there we go, a mixed array, but now I will have a significant amount more reading to do for my course, which I am sure will be, again, distinctly varied in how much I enjoy it versus how useful it is to me, but there we have it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't hurt any feelings with shitting on Wilder Girls too much, because I feel like that is the one thing where I am likely to get some strong opinions in return, but you know, I hope it was broadly interesting to hear my opinions, to hear some good recommendations. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like this video if you did indeed enjoy it, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more of me and my bookish content. I will see you next time.